Both grandfathers served in the United States Navy, one as a CB officer, so construction officer in the Pacific Theater of War during World War II. So literally landed after the second wave of Marines had taken the islands in the island hopping campaign, taking them back from the Japanese Army, and had a few brushes with a few scrapes, so to speak, over time, but came back whole, so to speak, and then launched his commercial construction career here in Houston during the oil boom of the 1950s. He was my mom's father. My dad's father served in the United States Navy as an enlisted man, but with and he was a radio operator on a submarine just after the war ended. Then they were offering for folks to come and make sure and protect against the Soviet aggression, so to speak. And because he had a German last name, and there were still some German remnants of what they thought were some U-boats still out in the Atlantic Ocean, they wouldn't promote him past E4 because they didn't trust him with the decoder machine. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But when he got back, he came home and used his GI Bill, and then went to law school as well, and came down here to Houston also during the oil boom. So that's my father's father. My mother's father, just going back, he actually rode down here in the 1930s on a motorcycle from Ohio, from Galion, Ohio, just to attend Rice University, which at that time was completely free if you were coming here for construction science or engineering. And while here at Rice, he was the football equipment manager because he was really short, and they wouldn't let him actually play on the team. But from there, he was immediately volunteered to be a CB officer, and then fought literally island by island in the Pacific Theater of War. Huge influence, particularly because they had some trinkets and uniforms, and I just became kind of obsessed with just wearing their jackets and their caps and their covers, and seeing their medals and some of the things that they brought back from their service, both in the submarine corps and in the Seabees, and kind of fell in love with the idea. And then over time, I had my mother's father had a set of encyclopedias, kind of like the old encyclopedia rack that would sit in the corner of your living room or something like that. And it was really outdated, but that's how I began kind of studying the military ranks and culture and different campaigns and history. So got really interested in military history, and kind of knew at that moment that I wanted to serve my country in some way. I just kind of needed a guiding light to figure out where I was going to serve and how I was going to serve. I wanted to be the best, so I joined what seemingly was the most difficult service to complete basic training in, and I chose the most difficult military occupational specialty or military job in the infantry, and wanted to be an officer eventually, but I also wanted to have the enlisted experience before I went to college, so I enlisted at the age of 17. Had to get my parents to sign off on the actual enlistment papers before heading out to boot camp and becoming an infantryman. I definitely saw myself as a lifer, as a career officer in the Marine Corps, infantry officer to be more specific, and but like I said, when I wanted that enlisted experience first, so I enlisted as an infantryman, then went to college at Texas A&M. And while I was in college, I actually got mobilized to serve in Iraq. And after being injured, so to speak, kind of dashed my hopes and dreams to become an officer and changed my career trajectory forever. But definitely wanted to be the guy who served at least 20 years and actually got to lead Marines in the battlefield and in training. A lot of the pre-9/11 training and units were completely shifted after 9/11. We were actually still doing Vietnam-era tactics in the School of Infantry in 1999, 2000, 2001. Remember still doing amphibious landings in the summer of 2001, a couple of months before 9/11 actually occurred. And that's kind of how the Marine Corps' posture was back in those days, and it was really, really fun. And then when 9/11 happened and Afghanistan started and Iraq started, we all knew we would be going at some point. Just kind of win. So I remember when 9/11 actually occurred, we all got our gear together and just waited some more. And then finally we got the call to be mobilized in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2004. So we left for Kuwait out of California in August of 2004 and was there during what was still, I think, considered to be some of the toughest months in the entire campaign. So the most casualties, the most coalition forces casualties were from August to December of that year. And then the first Iraqi national elections in 2005, and then returning home after that was kind of a dream combat tour for a Marine infantryman. And at the time I was a non-commissioned officer leading Marines in combat, and that was kind of what I always wanted to do and what I always saw myself doing before returning home to finish college and then hopefully becoming an officer. In the Marine Corps, a lot of people would probably agree with this statement, is that the Marine Corps is really run by non-commissioned officers. And unlike the Army or the Air Force or the Navy, it's not run by commissioned officers. It's the NCO Corps, the non-commissioned officer corps, makes up the backbone of the Marine Corps, particularly in the infantry, where decisions, strategic, operational, and tactical decisions are made by that non-commissioned officer, or what they call the strategic corporal in some ways, on the battlefield. So literally, we call it the 3-block war concept. So you have corporals in charge of a dozen Marines that are patrolling a city, and literally 3 different blocks. One block may be all-out warfare, house-to-house fighting, gun battles, and grenades. The second block will be peacekeeping operations and going and talking to the sheikhs and finding out information from local elected officials and shopkeepers, and just talking to people and building rapport in the marketplace. And the third block will be opening up a new hospital and actually kind of doing a PR campaign almost to show how the coalition forces are impacting the village in whatever area you're operating in. So literally you have to be the business end of bad foreign policy, so to speak, but in a very responsible way. And you're pushing that responsibility down on potentially a 20-year-old Marine corporal or a 22-year-old Marine sergeant that now is responsible for dozens of lives and millions of dollars of equipment, and making decisions on a block-by-block basis that could impact the entire strategy of the war. I was injured in September of 2004, had some trauma to my right eye, and was medically evacuated because I literally couldn't open my eye due to the swelling, and was medically evacuated and taken away from my Marines during a very important campaign that we were fighting for. And during that process, when you get to the hospital, after taking a helicopter for 2 hours, they take your rifle away because you're not able to use it. And that's kind of a huge blow to any Marine infantryman, especially someone with responsibility. And then once they triage you and they determine that they can't treat you there, that you actually need to see specialists and experts. In this case, it was 2 ophthalmologists in the Baghdad General Hospital. So they flew me even further away from my Marines and away from my unit, away from the fighting, so to speak, with no gear, no weapon, nothing. So when I arrived there, I saw the best 2 Army ophthalmologists in the Army, and I found out they were the only 2 Army ophthalmologists in the Army in Iraq at the time, but they did a really good job. Some minor surgery and some intense steroidal treatment. I was able to open my eye and see. Not very well. It was never a really good shot anyway, so it didn't really impact that, but I was able to see, and that they kept me there under observation. So I was waiting almost over a week at this point, and just when you're in a war zone and you don't have anything to do, and you know that your Marines are still out there fighting, and it really irks you. So I started volunteering to carry in the litters of those being wounded in the green zone in the Baghdad area. I started donating blood and literally doing whatever I could to help mostly the soldiers that were being injured. And then I kind of had enough after about a week, and I wrote a nice note to the Marine Corps hospital liaison who had a day off, which I didn't really know that that was possible in a war zone, but she wasn't at her desk that day. And so I wrote a nice note and I said, ma'am, I'm going to head back to my unit. You know, I talked to the doctors as well, and they're okay with it, but I just don't have, you know, I feel like you can help me out and take care of it when you can. So I actually walked to the rear of the hospital with whatever gear that I did have, and I found the first helicopter crewman I could. Is like, hey man, can I get a ride? And so literally I hitchhiked from Baghdad to Haditha Dam, from Haditha Dam to Al Taqadum, from Al Taqadum back to Al Asad to reclaim my weapon from the triage unit that took it from me. And then I hitched another helicopter back to Al Rupa, where my unit was actually being mobilized to pull out or to go support the operations that were going to lead up to the Battle of Fallujah in 2004. And so walking up to my Marines, my first sergeant had no idea that I was coming back. No word had passed because they had just gotten she had probably just gotten my note by the time I made it fully back. They had no idea I was coming back, and they were loading the trucks to move out eastward toward the Sunni Triangle, where all the trouble was at that time. And as I was loading an ammo can up, my Marines were just ecstatic to see me. I think that was my kind of defining moment, was like coming back to my Marines, keeping that faithfulness. You know, Semper Fidelis is our motto, which means always faithful in Latin. And I think keeping that faithfulness to my Marines and making sure and coming back at whatever cost, if they demoted me for leaving the hospital without permission, then so be it. At least I would be there to help them. After the eye trauma and the trauma to my knee, they basically, you know, told me that they're cutting their losses with me and not allowing me to seek a commission because they didn't think I would make it through the intense officer infantry training course. That to me was probably one of the biggest blows to someone's vision for who they are going to be the rest of their lives and really what they wanted to do. But it also makes you think about how you're going to continue to serve. And I think that that's what led me on my path to where I am now, is just redefining that service and finding a new avenue to take your life down and still make an impact and still take care of your Marines and still accomplish the mission. I started applying to different public policy jobs because I thought that was what I wanted to do, is to serve my country in a different way by working in government in some way. And I think that really enabled me to take off the green or brown uniform and put on the gray or black uniform and really throw me into the fire in learning the civilian world. And the good thing was that I was dealing with a lot of military and VA policy and trying to help constituents with issues, trying to talk to Ellington Field Joint Reserve Base on what their needs were from a funding perspective and what projects were needed. And that really gave me the mission that I had I had a gap in service almost, and that it filled that gap. It filled that hole in my heart, so to speak. And I felt like I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to serve the community in military transition and veterans affairs in whatever way I could, because I realized that the folks that were coming out didn't have it as good as I did. Like, they didn't have as successful of a transition as I did, even though it was difficult for a time. But I knew that I had to do something to make sure that these folks made that successful transition from military to civilian life. And so I had found my calling, so to speak, and I no longer knew, or I knew that the Marine Corps would never be my lifelong career. It would only be a small piece of my life, but the lessons I learned would impact the rest of my life in this career, this lifelong mission to serve this population of people when they're returning to Houston specifically. So we established the Lone Star Veterans Association to fill those gaps, being a little bit more agile as a nonprofit organization, a public trust, so to speak. And we got all of the major stakeholders in the Houston area that had an impact on military transition to be the original founding board. And from there, we launched what is now the largest network of post 9/11 veterans in the state of Texas, but we are particularly focused on making Houston the best place for post 9/11 veterans and their families through a couple of different programs, but really still focused on mentoring and networking those that are in transition from the military into our community. I went into the private sector and recruited a lot of veterans into the company that I worked for, and really developed some good procedures to follow and some good guidance and strategy to follow in recruiting military. And there were a group of oil executives that basically came together with and established an organization with the mission to specifically pipeline military into the energy sector. Next Stop was founded essentially to specifically pipeline military into Houston's industries, particularly energy, construction, and healthcare. The three main industries that fuel Houston's economy, so to speak. And we've been very successful since coming online in March of 2015. We have placed over 320 veterans since then in those industry sectors, and have plans to do many, many more as we continue to scale. I've realized over the years that this is my life's work. This is my mission now. This will take an entire career, an entire lifetime to get right, because the reason that veteran unemployment and homelessness and suicide is so often discussed in the media is because the front end of our transition is so poorly executed. When we leave our unit in California or Missouri or Virginia, and then we return to communities like Houston, there's no collective action, there's no collective impact, there's no one place to go. And that's really what we've done here in the building that I'm sitting in, that we moved into 2 weeks ago. Is we actually got all of the military serving agencies and organizations in Houston to co-locate under one roof, Lone Star Veterans Association and Next Stop included, to be able to collaborate and be that one central point of transition for inbound soldiers and their families. My life will be dedicated to addressing this issue at the community level to make sure that Houston continues to be the best place for transitioning veterans and their families.